I am unashamed. What about you?
Well, I'm back in the lair. I was traveling up in New Jersey and Michigan the last time y'all were down here, and had some really good experiences. I found out some things. You just kind of get in your mind. You think New Jersey.
Did you miss the floods?
Yeah, you're so far away from your mic. I thought you were in a cave.
Oh, we just sitting there talking. So did you miss the floods, Al, when you were in?
There was
I missed a hurricane, but
no, I'm talking about there was that
happened.
The same hurricane that came through Louisiana, which it got downgraded tropical storm. But it spawned tornadoes.
But
up
here's
in
what
New
was
Jersey.
interesting. Even before, as the hurricane is hitting Louisiana, hitting the coast, wiping out Grand Isle, there was a monsoon. I'm literally preaching up a storm. I'm looking outside and I thought, good grief, is the hurricane hitting here? I mean, just water. We go back to the hotel, though it's knee deep in the street because the tide was up. We're sitting right there on the Jersey shore. And I mean, I'm wading in knee deep water from the car to the hotel. I felt like Jonah. I was like, how do you get away?
Yeah, that's why I asked you, because it was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. And
then a week later.
And then about 3 days later, Ada comes through. And they get a whole nother round of flooding. But luckily by then, Lisa and I were off.
Ada or Ida?
Was it Ida?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ada.
I thought you had already made the Cajun accent.
That's probably how they said it. You're right.
Yeah.
So I was thinking Ada, Oklahoma, which is where you and Mom got married. So we found out.
That was Ida Bell.
Ida Bell?
Ida Bell.
Oh, okay.
You got Ada on the brain. I don't see Ada involved in anything. Ada didn't exist.
No, it didn't.
Ida. IDA. That's where Miss K.
I've been gone.
The town of Ida. There's a town named
It's
Ida.
hard to say I was on vacation because I was working, but I wasn't.
To me,
here.
you got to remember what people don't realize who do not live in Louisiana. When you hear your buddy, or in this case, your brother, say something that you have no idea what he's talking about, but you just don't stop him and say, because I just figured that was some new way to say it. Because that happens a lot in this culture.
It does. So, Jase, I was stopping by for the morning Chick-fil-A, which is what gets our podcast started here, for mainly you and Dad. But there's the young woman that was taking my order, because they take it outside, and she asked for my name, and I told her, so I give her the order, and she says, "Are you Al Robertson?" I was like, "Yeah, that's what's left of him, And she said, "Well, I recognize you from your voice." And she goes to Christchurch. And she said, "I just wanted to tell you how inspirational your family is. And I listen to your podcast." And, just having this old conversation. I was like, man, that's why I like Chick-fil-A. You got the people that wait on you, they also listen to the podcast.
I like Chick-fil-A because they had a novel idea. Let's just be kind and courteous to people who are giving us their money. Gee, Bob, that may work.
Yeah.
And they make a pretty decent
But it
chicken
makes
sandwich.
the other fast food places look terrible when you pull up there and they go, "Here." Oh, it just burns me up. I don't go to them anymore.
It's hard.
So,
a drive-through. So
Well, you're talking about being in particular an arena that I never go to.
well, I know, but
I don't
every once in
drive
a
up
while,
to Quick Stops and order chicken.
I don't either. But every once in a while, you're hungry and you find yourself.
Well, I drive through I take one for the team. I drive through for y'all. So it's a little bit of felt like a little fall yesterday. I get up yesterday morning. It's Labor Day. And man, just a beautiful day.
Which brings me to
humidity down.
Which brings me to one Austin Campbell.
Uh-oh.
Austin, wherever you are. Let's see, Tallahassee, Florida.
Tallahassee, Florida, the capital of Florida.
When they introduced me inducted me into the Louisiana Hall of Fame, they said, we need some attire that you would normally wear,
There's a mannequin dressed like that.
So they got a mannequin. The mannequin was, whoo. It wasn't very lifelike. I looked at that dude and I'm thinking, whoa, he's malnutrition. I mean, he had a little old skinny looking face, but I said, oh, well. But they had my clothes on him. And Austin Campbell, when I gave that shirt up, I had done some patching on it through the years.
It's 30 years old.
I wore it 25, 30 years. I don't forget how long, but
I was really happy about that shirt no longer being with us.
Well,
and so,
to all you women out there, It was a shirt that was never washed, ever. I just hung it up to air dry.
We're losing you today.
So
I'm
look.
not on your mic.
This came in the mail this morning from Austin Campbell. He's a longtime listener of ours. He said, you donated your favorite hunting shirt to a museum, which is true. I just mentioned it. But somewhere he rustled up in his closet, I guess, and he came up with the same exact shirt,
brand new.
which I thought it was almost, it was my first sight. The only thing I could compare it to is the resurrection. So this thing came out of nowhere via Austin Campbell. I appreciate it, dude. I told him to send you a duck call. I'll sign it for you to ease the pain a little bit. I don't forgot what these things cost, but this shirt,
evidently, it's
Jase,
priceless.
you wear this. You never get cold.
Phil, I know.
Ever.
The smell had gotten to a point to where when that was, I think that came from Martin. It was his scheme. He was like, how can we get rid of that shirt?
The shirt is not,
so I
not
think
a sponsor
that
shirt.
Martin had the idea of saying, look, let's donate it to the Hall of Fame, because then he won't say no because he's in a sticky spot there.
Granted, after 30 years and you don't wash clothing, all I will say is the worst can happen out of it is a little mustiness about it.
I got that box,
A
Jase.
little mustiness.
I was sending it to a woman in New Orleans to fix up the little alcove where Dad's stuff is in the museum. And I opened that box up and I thought, whew, because I mean, it was literally right after season. And it was
I
like,
developed a bitterness toward. I was so happy, and that's why this is. I don't know how to feel about it.
it's the
What are you talking
resurrection.
about? I am.
Awkward.
I will be nigh. It'll be great. It's already cooling down, even in
Well, look,
Louisiana now.
yeah.
We're into September. Another 3 or 4 weeks will be cool at night,
Yep.
and we jump on
It
the
was
old
63
4-wheeler
last night.
and heading toward the duck hole. I'll have my old shirt back with me.
Well,
That's right.
I took my first trip on the Scout today to see where we're at in the developments of the duck hole. And
Because Stone's he's now, the main, what would you call him?
the land manager.
The land manager, yeah.
Most of it's in his head, but I mean, that's all right. He's a good worker.
He's a good worker. We need him.
Yep.
And so, while I went, he's because you down here, you think it's easy just to till and plant, but down here it's so volatile, so
Water.
wet, and you got beavers, and so it's just not easy growing grass that ducks like to eat.
Right.
It's too low of ground to farm.
Yeah, it is. But so we try and do our best. So he showed me the, kind of where we're at. But 2 terrifying things happened today, which it was cooler, which I thought was nice. And you wouldn't think what I'm fixing to tell you what happened. But they did. So we get in the rig, we take off, we looked at the first place, which we called the Dog affectionately, because the name of the bayou is called Dog Bayou. I don't know why they name it that. But when we're shooting ducks, we say the dog is barking today.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going on one of the main roads, and, we're not going fast because it's every 20 feet, there's some kind of mud hole. And it hasn't rained here in how long? Since the hurricane.
Yeah.
And so it's been
2
quite
weeks.
a few days, but there's still some bad mud holes here and there. So we go down into a mud hole, and I look to my right because I saw something move. And some of the rigs have doors in the rigs, and some do not. But I had one of those, go, because there was a 3-foot, no embellishment, 3-foot cottonmouth on the side. So most of the roads you can tell where the tires go, and we're like where the mud.
Ruts.
So we're in the
Deep
right
ruts.
The right rut. Right above it was a little mound of dirt, and this 3-foot cottonmouth was curled up there.
Which puts him in pretty close proximity to your jaws.
I would say 2 to 3 feet and inches from the door. But when we hit the hole,
And he's mad because
look, his head, no embellishment, came up like a cobra. He just reared up, and that's when I went, go. go. My voice actually wouldn't work. And Jay thought I was saying no. And I said, Congo, Congo. And he looked back and he was still reared up like a cobra. I've never seen one do that. And so I was like, gun.
Only the big ones do that.
Yeah.
That's why I said earlier, son, you need to get out of town more.
You're spending too much time.
I mean,
in town.
look, Phil, when you're inches away from a cottonmouth, it's never a good feeling. And I didn't know that door was there because I was just like, I was flinching as in, don't bite me, don't make, because I saw that head come back. But I have to admit, Jay Stone, military trained him, free-handed with a pistol. First shot, he's got his head reared up. Pow! Incredible.
Took his head off.
It didn't take his head off, but he hit him and addled him into circles, which then produced the rest of the clip in rapid succession and ended it.
You meant to kill him.
Oh, he's dead. That's why I actually used the Outlaw Josie Wells, which is a prerequisite to watching this, the TV version. I said, oh, he's dead, all right. I don't know why that's funny. So the other terrifying moment, that was by far the most terrifying, but because I felt like the only thing I had in between me and death today was this
flimsy door.
Plastic door.
Jace has spent too many days in the subdivision now.
Yeah, he's lost his
I've
edge.
been over that land for 30, 40 years. I've only had a couple other times where I was in that proximity to a cottonmouth snake that's mad.
Yeah.
I mean,
Especially he was riled up too.
Close. Yeah. Well, most of them, most snakes run. They hear something coming, but their first impression is to kill you.
Yeah.
And so that's why he reared up on the wheeler. The second thing, because y'all had done a project where you move the dump, what we call the dump or the levee structure, to put a couple new holes with water on it.
Yep.
Y'all had. It is a long story project, and I loved it, everything about it, until I came up on where they got the dirt. And most people, they scrape down the dirt. Phil and his posse, they just dug a hole to the Earth's core. You're talking about a bottomless pit. So when we pulled up there and look.
It'll be a little pond with cypress trees growing around it before it's over. And I'll make that place look, it'll be a beautiful thing to walk up on. Granted, you don't want to be trying to drive through it with the four-wheelers, too deep.
Well, the last time something like this happened, which was a much smaller version, Phil, they built a little dump somewhere, but they didn't tell me they built it. And so I'm driving through. I don't forget what I was doing, but I was out and about. And because once the water floods, which it's going to flood, you don't know exactly where you're at any time, exactly.
Right.
You're in the general vicinity. And the next thing I know as I'm riding along is a four-wheeler is on top of me. And I got my gun trying to find the bottom because I have hit this hole and it just flipped. It immediately flipped.
It was a small hole. We just got a little dirt. But the bottom line is where the one you're talking about is the hole you saw that we just did. It was already a deep ditch. It was a deep ditch cut by the water eons ago. So we're just down inside that ditch, which makes it look like but it's just a hole in it. And it's already a ditch.
I'm just saying, if you happen to hit that hole and you don't know it's there, you have a 0% chance of surviving.
No, you just jump off the four-wheeler, swim to the bank. It ain't about 20 foot wide.
I love that every scenario for Jay's dad is a worst case scenario. It's death and mayhem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
it's when the
this was an argument we were having.
Subdivision meets your roots.
Yeah.
And it's a you're like, boy, this country is
I
down
think
in
the
here.
Bible is on my side. Where's that verse?
Oh, here it is, Jay. I return to it. Proverbs 20.
Listen to this. Listen to this carefully, Phil.
Proverbs 20. Let's take a break before I read it. So one of our favorite products, Dad, is Omega XL. And the reason why is because as you get a little bit older, you realize that inflammation becomes a problem. It creates aches and pains, as we like to say. And that's where all the pain comes from. And so you need some way to be able to remedy that. These Dr. McQuillan, who, by the way, Dad, we're going to get to meet the guys that started this company. Next week they're going to be coming through, and I'm super excited to hear more because there's great clinical research about it. These guys, they're these mussels that they grow in New Zealand, and it comes out of them is the extract that you get that helps with your inflammation. So it's really good. It helps us. We're believers in it. If you want to check it out, go to omegaxl.com/Phil, and you're going to buy a bottle and you get a second bottle for free. So it's omegaxl.com/Phil. You're going to buy one, get one for free. That'll give you a couple of months. You'll notice the difference. You can also give them a call at 800-844-4888. That's 800-844-4888, omegaxl.com/Phil. Check them out. Proverbs 26:27. If a man digs a pit, he will fall into it. If a man rolls a stone, it will roll back on him.
Yep.
Okay.
He's just saying gravity still exists. And, I mean, he didn't mean somebody went out there and dug a hole, then he literally fell in it. He's saying his lifestyle, you're digging a hole in the ground there.
You
dude.
remember the first time I ever heard this verse was on KNOE News. Alton Howard.
Nobody knows what that is.
Well, it's our local news.
Yeah.
So Corey's grandfather was running Howard Brothers stores, and there was an over-aggressive DA that didn't like him for whatever reason. He gets after him because Alton's brother was the mayor, so I'm sure there's a lot of political, and says they owe a bunch of money. And so they did a big audit. Well, it turns out they were owed about $200,000. They had overpaid. And so when Alton had a press conference, I'll never forget it. I mean, I was just a kid. This was in the 70s. And on the local TV, he read that verse because they said, "What do you have to say to Mr. Parkinson?" He said, "I got one thing to say. Proverbs 26:27. If a man digs a hole, he will fall therein. If he rolls a stone, it will roll back on him." And as a Christian, you were like, yes. I mean, it was like, because they were after him,
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
It was pretty impressive. It's the first time I ever heard that verse.
Well, with where we're at in Matthew, what happened to me with a snake and a pit, I couldn't help but think of the spiritual ramifications.
Of course you can.
Well, I'm saying, I think Jesus taught me well. He was more concerned about the spiritual than the physical. That's obvious. But I thought a bumper sticker statement, because Al, while you were gone, we went from the water to the wilderness. Or I think, when was the last time you were here?
Yeah, the last time I was here, we were doing the genealogy.
Yeah, we went John the Baptist. Well, we actually went Matthew 2.
Yeah.
And then the birth of Jesus and all the
How did Zach do?
Was.
Zach, was he a good quarterback? He filled my seat well?
Yeah, he did well.
Yeah.
Excellent. We're bringing him along.
I mean, I've slept since then, so I really don't remember what we talked about. But I know where
Zach's really smart. He's smarter than all of us.
He is smart. So, but what I thought, because the last time we were together, we talked about the temptation of Jesus.
Which I hated. I missed that because I love that text. That was
awesome.
Such a rich.
But I thought this last verse to me is like a bumper sticker, which it never gets any fanfare. But if you made this statement where it says in Matthew 4:11, then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. I mean, I just think that no matter what happens. And the more you read, especially early on, there's definitely spiritual warfare that's going on. And nothing has changed.
Yeah.
From then till now.
Right.
And so we made the point, kind of at our baptism, you have this moment where, yes, God declares us reborn, Son of God, daughter of God. And then you have God's Spirit. And we know what's coming.
Right.
Temptation, is that you, man?
That's me.
Yeah, temptation. He's gonna tempt you, because I think the evil one wants you to either follow him or at least shut up.
Well, I've thought it's interesting, and I don't know if y'all brought this up, that every aspect of what we would consider the main parts of the gospel story or Jesus' story, him coming to earth when he was on the cross, when he came out of the tomb, when he went back to the right hand of the Father, and also when he comes back for us, angels are present every time. And then they were also present here, after the spiritual test, that he got from the evil one. So I thought that was interesting that he comes from that other realm. And every time when Jesus was here, and he was only here 33 years, every time there was something major that was going to affect all of us, angels came and were part of that. Remember? Because the guy sitting on top of the tomb. So I always thought that was really interesting, their interaction, which is kind of what you're talking about, Jase, because it's a spiritual warfare. I mean, there are things we know from Ephesians 6 that are outside of our ability to even see or really experience,
Yeah, I had that written down. So if you're staying with us, I mean, you think about Jesus' birth. Here's God coming from a virgin. We went through that. We didn't really talk about a lot about his quiet life up until then, but I think it says something about his humility, even in that, is that he spent 30 years just being a guy. You know?
Right.
I mean, he's 30 now, and there's maybe one thing about when he was 12 and he got lost. Is there anything else from his birth to 30?
Nothing recorded.
I mean, don't you find that strange?
Yeah. Which lets you know that wasn't relevant, or it would be in there. I mean, the only one little thing there was the time when he was 12 and he was in the temple courts, basically teaching a class.
My point is, I think it says something about, like, the verses you read that sometimes looks like it's in contrast with the rest of them, that says, like, lead a quiet life and work with your hands, and and then you got one that's like, you're an ambassador of God. We're bold. God didn't give us a spirit of timidity, but of power. And so you're like, well, I thought I was supposed to lead a quiet life. But I think there's something to I mean, he literally led a quiet life for 30 years.
Uneventful.
And I've wondered, because here's his mother. She's told by Gabriel, the angel, that you're going to be with child. And she says, how can this be?
Yeah.
I'm a virgin. And we read about that, about Gabriel saying, with God, nothing's impossible.
Right.
So here he comes out of her loins in the manger. We remember this Christmas. So, and she's looking at him, but she's knowing the whole time how he got there, which is rather unusual.
Yeah.
In any time frame. This is the firstborn overall creation here.
Right.
And you're like, coming out of a human. Well, she's looking at him and taking care of him. He's a kid, but all the way, and can you imagine, after all the smoke cleared, she's hearing all these rumors that now they've got him, they're taking him, they're going to hang him on a cross, crucify him. She's sitting there this whole time, because even some of her other children didn't believe in him at first.
Nope.
His own brothers.
Right.
So you're talking about a childhood that would be an unusual one. I think that there would be more. I think the Bible writers didn't think it necessary for her to look at that part of the equation. But on Mary's account, all the way to the cross, she's looking up there and saying that's the one that came here the way he came here. So she never doubted whatsoever, but she just took it all in stride. And I think it is worth noting that the first ones that saw him when he was raised from the dead were the women, Mary, his own mother.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, you just think about it, that kind of, to her, she said, so that's what all that was about.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing to think about, really.
Oh, yeah. And that she really never...
It brings tears to my eyes, ladies and gentlemen,
That's
to just look at the whole picture through her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine that?
Well, Dad, she was the only physical link that Jesus had to humanity was her.
That's right.
Because everything else, there was no, Joseph wasn't his dad because he was of spiritual origin.
That's right.
So, I mean, she was the link to humanity, which is, when you think about it, I mean, what a responsibility, but what an honor.
Oh.
Which is why people honor her so much. I get it. Let's take another break. So one of the things we talk about a lot on our podcast is how important sleep is. I find the older I get, the more important it is. And Jase made the point that you spend, a third of your life in the bed, so you really need something comfortable to sleep on. And so we have found Helix mattresses, which are fantastic. And the company that makes those mattresses has now started a furniture, making couches and chairs. It's called Allform, ALLFORM. And so I have an Allform couch in my living room. And the neat thing about it is you get to customize the whole thing. Lisa picked out the fabric, exactly what we wanted. It comes in, it was in, it got shipped straight to my door, less than a week to get there, which is pretty amazing. And I'm the least mechanical person in the world. And I thought, oh no, you got to put it together. We put it together in about 10 minutes, which was pretty easy and amazing if I could do it. So if you want to check out this sofa, I think you'll love it. There's no risk because you get 100 days to decide if you want to keep it. That's over 3 months, which is great. You can get a full refund, but you won't want one. There's a forever warranty, literally forever. So there's a problem, Jase, into perpetuity. As long as Allform is around, you can get your money back, but you're going to love it. Go to Allform, ALLFORM.com/unashamed to get your perfect sofa. That's Allform.com/unashamed. They're offering 20% off all orders for our listeners. Allform.com/unashamed.
Well, I think it says something about patience and leading an ordinary life. A lot of people, they come to Jesus, they want all this
fanfare and hoopla,
immediately. And it takes time and there's a process. And
she basically stood quietly by everything that was happening and swirling around him. She was just over there watching.
Right.
Yeah.
I just think the fact too that he did it that way. If I was God, glad I'm not, it'd be terrible. What's this waiting around? What's this going for 30 years?
Yeah, and when Gabriel got through informing her, you're gonna have a baby. By the way, your kinfolks over there, Elizabeth, she's up there about 75 years old, whatever. She's in her 70s, but she's 6 months pregnant right now. I just thought I'd tell you that. That's Gabriel talking to Mary. Mary said, "Do what?" And she's like, "Oh, so yeah, that's right. There's another one coming." But he's got a natural birth. A natural birth, he is, but the one we're talking about here, Mary, it's not natural. This is a spiritual birth. But you can imagine her trying to get that information, saying, "Let me see now. Elizabeth is in her going. Oh, she's an old woman, and and Zachariah's old as a hill, and she's 6 months pregnant." That's when Gabriel said, "Look, I know this is kind of hard to grasp. This is coming at you pretty fast." But nothing's impossible for God.
And
It helps my faith to not worry about things when you say, "Well, I don't. If this happens, or then that couldn't have happened." With God,
well, my theory has always
He pulled this off. Anything could happen.
My theory has always been about that was another thing coming from the spiritual realm that gave her some physical help and spiritual help. Because think about it. Nobody believed her, including Joseph initially.
That is correct.
And then the angel lined him out and said, "No," or vision.
They were all getting ready to pounce on her.
Well, she's a teenage girl. She hadn't slept with him.
I'll get rid of her, old Joseph. I'll get rid of her.
Yeah, and he was a good guy.
Keep the heat off of her best.
So she didn't have anybody she could communicate with or talk to about this. And so he says, "Oh, by the way,
and it's wasn't fitting for her to go to marriage counseling."
No, that's right. Nobody was going to listen to her.
Think about that.
Who would believe you anyway?
So that's why I think he opened that door for her. Because you remember when she walks up, Elizabeth says, "The child in my womb," which of course was John the Baptist, just jumped for joy.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, it's like she could relate to somebody else because, like you said, their situation.
And they got together for months.
Oh yeah, and he wound up being the one that, 30 years later,
they're talking it over, saying, "How you feel?" "Well, I feel pretty good." I said, "Boy, we're having some sure enough bursts here."
And that's why I don't think it's an accident that right after this temptation, in chapter 4 and verse 12, Jesus hears that John had been put in prison, so he returned to Galilee. And this is the moment where he goes public. Up until this point, he led a quiet, ordinary life.
That's right.
Did right.
No miracles.
Yeah,
Nope.
but I mean, righteous to the core, and now he's had this baptism and this declaration, and he's had the temptation.
His formal introduction, really.
But I just don't think it's an accident that when he hears John is in prison, because when you think about physical earthly kingdoms, the prison system is a part of their power.
Yep.
You know, you got police force, you got armies, you got, propaganda, whatever you in that world. So you say, well, what happens? Well, Jesus goes to he leaves Nazareth and he goes to Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said. So he's still fulfilling prophecy through the prophet Isaiah, land here and the way of the sea along the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. And then it says, the people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. So he's basically taking this prophecy of he's a light switch. And then he says, from that time on, Jesus began to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. And that's why I brought up that about John the Baptist. I think you see a clear picture of what earth's kingdom is all about. I mean, what is he doing? John the Baptist has been full of the Holy Spirit since birth. Looks like a wild hippie, except that he's got animal skins and eating locusts and honey, but he's declaring that there's a God and there's a Messiah, and they're like, let's put him in prison.
A strange dude to pick out of the creation.
Right.
Pretty strange.
Well, in essence, he's the last prophet because he was pointing to Jesus, who is the last prophet. But I mean, he was the last prophet of Israel to point people to the Messiah. He was it. So it almost like
all those prophecies stop with him.
That's right. It's almost like he channeled. Of course, you remember they thought he was Elijah, but he channeled Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah. All those old guys were all channeled into this one crazy dude.
Yep.
That was pointing toward Jesus. Which, you know what I find fascinating, Jason, when we got a lot to go to get through the Sermon on the Mount, but in Matthew 11. When John heard in prison what Christ was doing, he sent his disciples to ask. So right after all this has happened in this Sermon on the Mount, John sends word to Jesus, says, are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else?
Yeah.
And I've always found that fascinating because he was a guy who we think of as being, you couldn't be any more convicted than this man. And yet in that prison, for whatever reason, he had doubts. He sent word and said, no.
Or he just didn't know.
Or he didn't know. But I mean, he knew because he
said, what am I doing here?
That's right.
I mean, it's your cousin. You're like,
But I mean,
that's why I think Jesus did stay here 30 years and go through the ordinary, because it established the fact that what he was doing would be so much more extraordinary.
Right.
It's like, you're telling me you're the creator of the universe and you basically hung out for 30 years just building some baskets and whatever carpenters build, but that's what he did.
And you're right.
I think
I'm looking at the people who came up with this and wrote it down. I'm thinking, what was motivating them to get this kind of information out to the world?
Right.
But Phil, this is a reason why, y'all, I've told my story many times. I was real quiet and shy until I came to Jesus. But this is one of the things I thought about, because he was mainly quiet until it was time to say something. And when he said something, he didn't stop talking about it till they killed him over it.
Yep.
And so I'm saying it's the power of motivation and what you're doing is a factor. I mean, just because your personality you may seem one way or another. I mean, God can really, he does the extraordinary out of ordinary. That's what he does. I think he was laying the premise.
No, I think you're right. And I think his normalcy worked against him with those closest to him.
Exactly. I think that's why his brothers didn't believe.
I think so too. Because you remember we talked about that one little scene where he was going to go to Jerusalem.
Yeah,
and
they got ready to show us some stuff.
Yeah. Because they said if you're going to be a public figure, you got to get out there more.
Oh,
I mean,
Yeah, but Al, look at the
They put no
frustration.
political line on
that's
it.
right.
But
a
look,
public
just
figure. I mean, he's the son of God. He's your brother. But it's like, well, if you're going to really get into this, you don't
I
have
hate to say it,
Look.
but Joe Biden never. He just hung back in the shadows, but he made it.
He made it.
in
His-
But
politics.
see,
go.
think about all the conflict, the brothers and cousins that you're raised with, and you have disagreements and conflicts, and one of them says, "Oh, you think you're perfect?" And Jesus is like, "Yeah." Well, then you're better.
That's
He's
right.
like, he thinks he's perfect.
Hey, let's take a break. So, Jace, what do you have to say about hair today? Anything
In
you-
our society, what's crazy is if you are hairy, that is usually frowned upon, unless you don't have the ability to grow hair.
Well, why are so many people afraid of losing it? If it's what you say,
Well,
but most people don't.
it's frowned upon to be
Because
hairy.
I
It's
think
frowned upon.
our
But if you
civilization-
begin to lose it, then
That's frowned upon.
Because look, you know what? I got it. People want something they can't have.
Well, that's true. And some of you guys out there are beginning to lose your hair, and you don't want to do that. So one of our longtime sponsors, the company called Keeps, Keeps, they specialize in helping you keep your hair. So you got to get in there early, though, because once it's gone, they can't help you out much. So check them out. Go to their website, keeps.com, keeps.com/door. You're going to get 50% off your first order for their hair loss treatments. That's keeps.com/door, 50% off. Check them out. You know what it reminds me of, Jace? It's like Joseph and his brothers. Remember back in the original, the 12 tribes? Because he was the same way. He had that special gift of being able to interpret the dreams. The difference was he wasn't perfect. He was pretty cocky about it. But his brothers, I mean, they hated him in that case because they were like, who does he think he is? And of course, he was Jacob's favorite. So it was just like what you're
by the
describing.
way, I've seen that type situation flare up a lot within families.
Oh, yeah.
One of them is they get on one of them and they just rip him.
Right.
Well, especially when this guy, you don't know he's from heaven. I mean, you heard the story. Yeah, mom went through a psychological problem, thinking that she had never been with a man. I mean, I know this stuff had to come up.
Oh yeah.
They're like, she actually claims that she made love with God, I guess. I mean, tell us how that went. Oh yeah. She needs some medication. I'm because they didn't believe. So I think they had distanced themselves. It was just too unbelievable.
Plus, they had to have had a terrible reputation in
Exactly.
in
Hey.
Nazareth. I mean, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, there's the."
No,
I mean,
no.
every time they would see Jesus, it would take them back for a lot of people to the lie that started. That's from their
Yeah.
perspective. That's-
Nobody's believing that story.
No.
And look, they still don't. They're like, oh no.
No.
And for most families, it would be a destructive process, which it kind of was for them in the sense that they didn't really believe who he was when he finally got to that
It's
point.
kind of like what's the old guy, the second, third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
He was like, whoa, with the virgin birth. He was like, no way.
Right.
Yeah.
But-
Well, I mean,
but
look,
then when he
it's-
read what he said, he's like, I tell you what, I'm a Christian as far as what Jesus said.
Yeah.
I can't argue with anything he said.
He couldn't embrace the supernatural.
Couldn't embrace
Yeah.
the supernatural.
Right. A lot of people are like that.
You know, a lot of people, Al, by the way, to this day, and John said it had started way back. A lot of people, Al, have a difficult time and believing in the supernatural,
That's right.
and especially like the virgin birth. They can't get past that.
Right.
They're just like, couldn't have happened.
Even though Matthew tries to make the case because he says this was predicted, hundreds of years earlier, that this would be how he got here. And it was back in Isaiah 7.
That's true.
So, I mean, that in itself is pretty amazing that they claimed it hundreds of years later.
How could they have known?
I doubt Mary or Joseph, either one, ever knew that was in Isaiah. I mean,
Exactly.
they didn't know that at all.
So I got your sermon idea, Al.
I'm always looking for sermon ideas.
Based on the the difference in the earthly kingdom, let's lock John up and eventually crucify Jesus, versus Jesus saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. So this is where he went public. I think the show that we all love, The Chosen, did a good job of this about events that happen in Capernaum. Mm. So I did this little study on Capernaum, which the English definition of the word that is translated Capernaum is a confused jumble, a place marked by a disorderly accumulation of objects. That's what it means. I'm like, why did Jesus pick there to start his public ministry? Oh, because it's a confused jumble, a place marked by disorderly accumulation of objects. So I'm going to prove that to you. And this was just in my study late at night. So I picked out a few places and a few events that happened in Capernaum that I thought they were interesting. So one of them is found in Mark 1 in verse
21.
Yep. Is that where you were going?
Yep.
Unbelievable. Well, because here's the contrast. Let me read this. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority. And look, by the way, this word is going to keep coming up about his authority. Because when you start talking about heavenly kingdom versus earthly kingdom, it becomes an authority question. Not as the teachers of the law. Just then, a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, which they, in Luke's version, he says something right before he says, "What do you want with us?" Do you remember what it was? He goes, "Ha!" H-A. You know, it's in Luke 4:33 and 34.
So he laughs out loud first.
He goes, "Ha!"
Luke what?
Luke 4:33 and 34. Yep. He goes, "Ha!" It says in a loud, which is what we do in text messages. And I didn't realize that actually some guy who was demon possessed.
I never have noticed that before, Jase. You, boy, that late night Bible study open up a little can. I never had seen that.
You know why I'm bringing this up? You know why I'm bringing this up?
We call that a deep dive.
Only you could bring it up.
Look, here's why I'm bringing this up. Because I'm jumping to the end. Because I think that's what America does when Jesus comes on scene. I think it's the same. Now, I'm saying not the entire country, because there are a lot of people who believe. But a lot of people, when they hear about, oh, Jesus, the heavenly kingdom, where God reigns is where the kingdom is, and God's reigning in you, so you're the kingdom.
Yeah. To add fuel to your statement, I got a letter the other day. Most letters don't come my way, ladies and gentlemen, but every once in a while, if they find one worthy of note or something, they bring it by. But I read the note, and the guy said, there's about 14 or 15 of us that's meeting up here. We're in the great state of Vermont. He said their greatest line is, we're the most non-religious state in these United States. They say it with pride. We are a non-religious, we are ha, 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 to your point.
I mean, there's a sermon here.
They are loving it, and they're announcing it that we don't go this Jesus deal at all. It's ha, ha, ha to them, which I thought a little interesting in lieu of what you just said, Jase. I mean, he said, look, there's 15 of us that are hanging tough, but he said it's all around us. He said it's just constant
notice the demon
badgering of anybody. The demon
was like, ha.
Yeah.
And I think Mark left it out because he didn't have a sense of humor. That was a joke. But so then he says,
hang on, guys. Let's take our last break.
He says, ha. And then he says, what do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? Which I think having the ha in there gives you some cynical attitude. Because it's hard, like when somebody sends a text message, it's hard to get
They don't seem to be afraid right now.
No, they're like, whatever.
And this is the evil spirit that's talking about him, right? Himself.
I know who you are, the Holy One of God. But I just think that it's in quotations. And so Jesus is be quiet sternly. So, because I think this guy was, yeah. Well, he's like, be quiet, stern. So when the creator of the universe does anything sternly, I'm sure that was a mic drop moment. Come out of him. The evil spirit shook. This is actually not funny, but I keep getting tickled. Shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. And I'm not sure what a shriek is.
That means...
Well, how do you know that's what that is?
That's what it is.
If it helps your feelings, then it's the opposite of ha, ha, ha.
Yeah. Well, it might have just been...
No, I think it was shrill.
I thought it like a dog, when it...
It's a laughing matter.
Yeah.
And seconds later, when the demon leaves and they're shrieking, meaning screaming at the top of your lungs, the people watching would have said,
uh-oh,
there's something
to
this guy.
What they said is
this was in the synagogue,
my point,
remember?
What they said is what my point is. The people were all so amazed they asked each other, what is this? A new teaching? And then they put, and with authority, ! He even gives orders to evil spirits, and they obey him. News about him spread all over. So my point is, look, I came up with these three things, not because I wanted to come up with three things. I just was trying to think about the difference in the earthly kingdom, the earthly authority, and Jesus' authority. And so I asked this question, what is the difference between Jesus speaking with authority versus the teachers of the law? I mean, what was different in what they were representing, or just teachers in general, than what Jesus? So the first thing I thought about was the teachers of the law, they represent what is written. But Jesus represented the one who wrote it. I think that's the biggest point.
It's a great point.
And you think about modern churches today, how much is argued over what is written versus who wrote it.
Correct.
And you don't think that'd be a big deal.
That's why he said you diligently study the scriptures, because you think by them you possess eternal life, but the scriptures are talking about me, yet you refuse to come to me and be saved.
I have that written down. John 5:39-40. I was fixed to say it next. So let me give you the second one. Let me give you the second one because we're almost out of time. So this is in Mark 2. You go to the next chapter in Mark, because Matthew doesn't go through each episode at Capernaum, but when you read the other Gospels, you see other things. So you remember the story about the Jesus healing a paralytic, that they opened up the roof and lowered him down, like verse 5. Jesus says, he saw their faith and he said to the paralytic, son, your sins are forgiven. Well, now that was interesting because verse 6 says, now some teachers of the law, same group, they're following him around, were sitting there thinking to themselves, why does this fella talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? So immediately Jesus knew in his spirit what this was and what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, why are you thinking these things? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or say, get up, take your mat, and walk? And there's several other illustrations.
So I'm beginning to see a pattern form here, going back to the original the original question. Because the thing swirls around Capernaum, where there's all these obnoxious behavior and unbelieving, sinful people.
Chaos.
If you can get this bunch turned around, start with the ones who are the laughers and the ones that are smug and laughing, like we've got in America right now.
Well, look what he says in verse 10, this same theme. He says, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority, here's a word again, on earth to forgive sins, he said to the paralytic, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. So what my second point, the first one was the one who wrote it rather than what's written. The second one was Jesus highlighted the spiritual over the physical. And a lot of people, even today, when you fast forward to the modern churches, they're looking for those physical signs. But the source is more important than the sign. And that was his point here.
Right.
That all the trouble came in. He's like, wait, he's talking about forgiving sin. I mean, healing, that's great. I mean, awesome. He's going to die again. But when he said, I'm forgiving his sins, what? You've now moved up the pecking order of authority. If you have that authority.
One of the things that rang out from Jase, the naysayers, the ha-has, we have never seen anything like this. That he was, which was the reason he went over there.
Right.
Because he said, I'll show them things that they've never even thought could happen.
Right.
Well, the third thing is in Matthew, so I'm not going to read it, but because we're going to get to it in chapter 8, where he healed the centurion's servant. So here's a guy, this is right after he heals a leper. Then he heals a centurion here. So here's a Greek who's not, he's not even from the right side of the tracks here.
Right.
And it's a weird thing. I mean, because he represents the group that's eventually going to crucify Jesus and do the physical acts. But he has this faith in Jesus, and he has a love for his servant, which is really weird when you look at earthly powers. Most guys in charge, they ain't worried about their servants.
Right.
They'll get them another one. And I think that's why Jesus stopped the presses and said, now this, I haven't seen greater faith. Because you really have somebody not operating from an earthly viewpoint. And that's why my third point is Jesus represented a heavenly kingdom, not an earthly kingdom as far as power is concerned.
Yep.
Because he wants all people to be saved. I don't think it's an accident that it happened to be a Roman centurion. It happened to represent an earthly power where these things that I mentioned before, physical armies and police and walls and locks and clocks and propaganda and politics, all those things funnel the earthly. You go over to Jesus' side and it's spiritual armies, The weapons we fight with are not of the world. Because this is going to be the backdrop to where he's fixed to tell you the kind of people that God is seeking is just the opposite of what you thought.
Yep.
The meek, the humble, those who mourn. You're like, what? Well, you would seem that's the group that just got whooped by an army.
Right.
In the physical world.
Yep.
And I think that is what this contrast was about no prisons, no walls, no lock. We have an eternal purpose. The ministry of giving instead of grabbing. You just think about it. In any kind of these wars, it's always you go in, you get their stuff, you get their treasure, you annihilate them, you get their stuff. And with God, it's the exact opposite. You love them. We consider to be sheep to be sacrificed, and we give, which is what he's setting the tone. So I just think when he said repent for the kingdom of heaven is near, that statement was basically centered around those three aspects of I'm representing the one who sent me. It's more about the spiritual than the physical, even though I'm getting your attention with this, and eventually it'll be more about the heavenly rather than the earthly.
And it's also a confirmation of what John had been saying up until this point anyway, right?
Exactly.
A lot of it. So we got to close out. I do want to mention this. We have a new, one of Tony's new art pieces behind us. It's called the Family Edition. It's the only thing that's been signed by all your kids, Dad, and you and Mom. Yeah. I mean, nothing else has been. So Tony gets 15% of everything you buy to Miamu or Camp Chioka or All God's Children. So it's a really good deal. The sale ends today for everybody else, but because you're a podcast listener, he's going to extend it through the end of September. So you use the code PHIL25, you get 25% off. That's TonyThomasArt.com. Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, Subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.